Hebrews chapter 7, verses 23 through 28. Now there have been many of those priests since death prevented them from continuing in office. But because Jesus lives forever, he has a permanent priesthood. Therefore, he is able to save completely those who come to God through him, because he always lives to intercede for them. Such a high priest truly meets our need, one who is holy, blameless, pure, set apart from sinners, exalted above the heavens. Unlike the other priests, he does not need to offer sacrifices day after day, first for his own sins and then for the sins of the people. He sacrificed for their sin once for all when he offered himself. For the law appoints as high priests men in all their weakness. But the oath, which came after the law, appointed the Son, who has been made perfect forever. All right, we are in Hebrews chapter 7. And if you are listening to this in conjunction with our Advent series, then this is kind of a standalone text. And so we're not like going through the book of Hebrews. There's not a bunch of context to build in here from previous videos. So I'm going to add a lot of that context to this video. So this will probably be a little bit longer of a passage breakdown video. But here we go, Hebrews chapter 7. What you need to know right at the outset is that the writer of Hebrews is in the middle of trying to tell the people, the Hebrews, that Jesus is a priest and that he's not a Levitical priest. He is a priest in the order of a guy named Melchizedek. And the writer of Hebrews is trying to show why it's much better to have a priest in the order of Melchizedek than it is to have a priest in the order of the Levites, who were the priests that the Jews typically thought of. The whole point of chapter 7 is to unpack this idea that Jesus is a priest in the order of Melchizedek. And here towards the end of chapter 7, verses 23 through 28, now the writer of Hebrews applies this to the Christian to show them why this is so exciting, why this is such good news. And so we'll look at this, and we're kind of looking at the end of a comparison between a Melchizedekian priest and a Levitical priest. Here we go. Now there have been many of those priests since death prevented them from continuing in office, but because Jesus lives forever, he has a permanent priesthood. Therefore, he is able to save completely those who come to God through him, because he always lives to intercede for them. So these short kind of phrases pulled together into some really important theology and connected by just these little prepositions, which also matter a great deal. So we get the first word now, right, which just kind of reminds us that there's been 22 verses leading up to this one, and we're just kind of jumping in halfway. So now there have been many of those priests, and immediately you should be asking yourself, who are those priests? And the answer, of course, comes from everything else we've looked at. Those priests are Levitical priests. And his point is there have been many of them, lots of these priests, right? Now, we love numbers. We always associate more numbers as a good thing, but it's not always a good thing. There have been many of these priests. We should also ask why. Why have there been so many of these priests? And the answer is found right here. Since death prevented them from continuing in office. Seems so self-evident, so obvious that this is true that we don't even really observe it as a phenomenon. Of course priests die. Of course they have to be replaced with new priests. And so one question we could be asking ourselves is, why is that even an issue? Why is it an issue that a priest dies? Is that even a big deal? You know, as I think about having a priest, it doesn't bug me that the priest dies so much until you realize there's another option on the table. But, right? But, so in contrast to this larger part of verse 23, we get this next verse, verse 24, but because Jesus lives forever, all right? So this is the opposite of these priests over here who keep dying, right? These two things are in opposition to each other. I wanted to use red. Here you go. We'll put a red X there. Because he does not die, because he lives forever, he has a permanent priesthood. Wow. What we begin to realize then is that these priests are many because they have a temporary priesthood. And there's this other option on the table of having a permanent priesthood. And because we know that, wow, now that this other option's on the table, we get to ask ourselves, well, which one would you like? Would you like a permanent teacher or a substitute teacher? Would you like a permanent worker or a temporary worker? And of course the answer is permanent if they're good, permanent if they're solid. So we're going to now look at the character of Jesus versus these Levitical priests and see who's better. But before we get there, we have a kind of resulting thought from this line of thinking about temporary versus permanent. He says, therefore, he, right? And he, of course, who is that? That is Jesus, is able to save, and here's an important word, completely. The fact that he has a permanent priesthood means that he is not able to save, not that he's not able to, means that he does not save in a temporary way as a temporary priest who's dying all the time, but that he saves completely in a full way. This concept, by the way, of completion in the Bible is everywhere. And one other ways of saying it would be brought to fullness. And the idea is that, that it's complete, that every piece is in its place, like a 1,000-piece puzzle, and every piece is in its place, not just 999, not just 900. And so what we're beginning to see is that the old priesthood, the Levitical priesthood, is beginning to have some holes. And one of those is that it doesn't save completely. And one of the reasons is because the priests keep dying. But Jesus has a priesthood that's not like that. Jesus is able to save completely who? Let's ask. Is it the whole nation of Israel? Just anybody who's a Jew? No. It is only those who come to God through him. Okay? Through him. He is able to save completely those who come to God through him. Actually, we should probably move this little marker here. Save completely those, and if we're wondering who are those who come to God through him. So let's get that clear. Those who come to God through him are able to be saved completely. And of course, it must be through him because we're talking about priests. Priests are those who go to God on behalf of someone else. So you can go to God through a Levitical priesthood, a Levitical priest, or you could go to God through a Melchizedekian priest. And the Melchizedekian priest is better because they are of a permanent priesthood. They live forever. Okay? Why? Again, and he just reiterates because, right, he always lives to intercede for them. So part of being able to save completely is being able to always intercede. He always lives to intercede for them. You and I continue to sin, though we have been saved in Jesus Christ. We need a priest who continues to intercede for us. Only Jesus can do this because he's the only one who doesn't die. Okay, so that's talking about Jesus's eternality, Jesus's priestly eternality. And that leads to a complete saving for you and I. And now he's going to begin to unpack the rest of why Jesus is a superior priest. And again, I'm not going to go into verses 1 through 22, which explain how Jesus is a Melchizedekian priest. You can go study those verses on your own. I'm just going to explain Jesus is a Melchizedekian priest And we're just going to take that for granted right now. If you want to go study how that's true, you got to go look at verses 1 through 22. So we'll pick back up in verse 26. Such a high priest truly meets our need. Okay? One who is holy, blameless, pure, set apart from sinners, exalted above the heavens. Unlike the other priests, he does not need to offer sacrifices day after day, first for his own sins and then for the sins of the people. He sacrificed for their sins once for all when he offered himself. For the law appoints as high priests men in all their weakness, but the oath which came after the law appointed the Son, who has been made perfect forever. So again, we have a back and forth comparison. Let's get into it. Such a high priest, right? And this is talking, once again, who are we talking about? Such a high priest. We're talking about Jesus here. Missed an S. Jesus, such a high priest, truly meets our need. Okay, we need someone who can save us completely. But also let's get into the character of the priest. We need a priest who is holy, blameless, pure, set apart from sinners, and exalted above the heavens. One of the big problems with the Levitical priests is that they are not holy, okay? They are not holy, they are not blameless, they are not pure, they are not set apart from sinners, and they are not exalted above the heavens. You know, a priest that is too earthly, you're going to have some worries about how well they're going to be able to go before God in heaven. What you want in a priest is someone who is fully human, yet not sinful. That way they can go confidently before a holy God. You need both of those things. And the problem with the Levitical priests is that they're not holy. They're not blameless. They're not pure. They're not set apart. And this is really proven out true in the following verse. Unlike other high priests, right, and this one would be Levitical, he does not need to offer sacrifices day after day. Now, the writer of Hebrews is beginning to hint to something that he's going to unpack more fully in chapter 10, talking about the kind of sacrifice that Jesus brings. We're going to see him introduce the idea in this text and unpack it more fully throughout chapters 8, 9, and 10. But for now, let's just kind of understand his point here about offering a sacrifice day after day. Why, right? Why must the Levitical priests offer sacrifices day after day? And we get two answers to this question. One, excuse me, first for his own sins, and then two, for the sins of the people. First, for his own sins. You could go to, for example, Leviticus chapter 8, where Aaron and his sons are being, what's the word? Oh gosh, sorry, one second. The word is ordained. Aaron and his sons are being ordained as the first priests, and they must present sin offerings for their own sin first. Or you could go earlier in the book of Leviticus. I believe it's chapter 2. It might be Leviticus. It's either Leviticus 2 or 4. I'm forgetting right now off the top of my head. But I'm leaning towards 4. There, you're going to see the sin offerings outlined and how you're supposed to do those. And you will notice that the very first thing mentioned in the sin offerings is the priest offering sacrifices for his own sins. There's a recognition that the priest needs to be holy before he can go intercede for the people. And so the priests are offering sacrifices day after day, right? Why? First for their own sins. And this is true in Leviticus 8. It's also true earlier. And only then can they offer sacrifices for the people. And if you go look at, let's say, Leviticus 16, which is outlining the Day of Atonement, right? All the sin of the nation getting put on a goat, you will notice that the very first thing the priest has to do is again offer sacrifices for their own sins. And you could go look at Leviticus 16. You could go look at verse 6 or 11, and you'll notice there it says Aaron is to offer the bull for his own sin offering to make atonement for himself and his household. Then he is to take the two goats and present them before the Lord at the entrance to the tent of meeting. And then verse 11, Aaron shall bring the bull for his own offering to make atonement for himself and his household, and he is to slaughter the bull for his own sin offering. So the priests not only die, they are also sinful. And because they're sinful, they're not very good at their job. They have to have sacrifices made for their own sins. Okay, now we've got another point here to appreciate the sin problem of Levitical priests. And this is going to be contrast now with Jesus. This is Jesus. Yes, Jesus. He sacrificed for their sins once for all. Again, we're going to see that come back in chapter 10. You can go there and read more about that. But Jesus sacrifices sins once for all. So it's not a day after day. It's not a day after day thing. This is the second kind of major issue that we could think about, is how often these sacrifices have to happen for their own sins. And then up above, it's about permanent priesthood versus death, right? Okay, so this one is that he sacrifices for their sins once for all when he offered what? A bull? No, he didn't offer a bull. He offered himself. Jesus is the spotless sacrifice. Remember that all sacrifices must be spotless. Jesus doesn't have to offer sacrifices for his own sins because he's already spotless. He gives himself as a sacrifice for sin. And the writer of Hebrews, again, chapter 10 later, we'll talk about how the blood of bulls and goats could never take away sin. It always had to be a human sacrifice, and ultimately a divine one as well. Okay, so we've got this piece that Jesus sacrifices once for all when he sacrifices himself. So Jesus has a, quite simply, better sacrifice, and he is himself holy where the earthly priests are not. And then the last piece is going to be talking about the appointment of this priesthood. He's bringing in a new point. For the law appoints as high priests men, merely men, in all their weakness. But the oath, which came after the law, appointed the Son. All right, so we've got the appointment of men, okay, versus the appointment of the Son. And what appoints men? Here's the third point. The law appoints men, but what appoints Jesus as the Melchizedekian priest? The oath. Now, this is, again, what verses 1 through 22 are all about in Hebrews 7. But just to understand where this is coming from, this is from Psalm 110. And you could look at verses 1 through 4, particularly here. Psalm 110 is what's called a messianic psalm. It's all about the Messiah. And it begins with this: the Lord, which is Yahweh, says to my Lord, lowercase, right? Not Yahweh, but just Elohim, I believe. Oh, I might be getting that wrong. Don't quote me. I forgot what the actual Jewish word is here. Hebrew word is here. But it's Yahweh says to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet. This is the passage that Jesus famously asked the Pharisees to explain. Who is David talking about when he says, the Lord says to my Lord? He's asking, who is David's Lord? And of course, the answer to who is David's Lord is the Messiah, and it is ultimately Jesus. So that's verse 1. Now, if we continue on, it says, the Lord says to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool under your feet. The Lord, that's Yahweh, Yahweh will extend your mighty scepter from Zion, saying, rule in the midst of your enemies. Your troops will be willing on the day of battle. Arrayed in holy splendor, your young men will come to you like dew from the morning's womb. And then we get to verse 4. The Lord has sworn, and again, that's Yahweh, capital Lord. Yahweh has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek. So that's verse 4, right? So the oath, which came after the law, right? This is literally, the oath is coming here in about 1000 BC. The law came about 1440 BC. So the law came first, but after the law was given, an oath came, and in the oath, the Son, the Messiah, right, who is going to be called God's Son, and that's going back to 2 Samuel 7, the Son is appointed by the oath. You are a priest in the order of Melchizedek forever. So which one is better? Which appointment, which ordination is better? Oops, wrong color. Which ordination is better? The law, which appointed men in all of their weakness, or the oath, which appoints a perfect Messiah? So the question here is oath vs law, right? And obviously oath wins. And then this very last line, which picks up on a theme that's been running throughout the entire book of Hebrews, but the Son who has been made perfect forever. And this gets to a different idea, that the Son, Jesus Christ, was made into the perfect sacrifice by what he suffered. And the simple point here is that Jesus didn't die as a baby for the sins of the world. He died as a man who had suffered. And that's what it took to become the perfect sacrifice for mankind. So back to Jesus being a better sacrifice. He is much more righteous than some bull that just doesn't have a physical blemish. Jesus is the perfect offering. He's been made perfect through obedience and through suffering. He's a better priest. He comes from a better ordination. He's eternal. He's not a sinner. And so what this is saying is that Jesus is in every way a better priest. And that, brothers and sisters, is good news, that we have a high priest forever in the order of Melchizedek, and his name is Jesus Christ. And he lives even now interceding for you. God bless you.